Good day, humans. Welcome to a new episode of Psicoactive. Today we have the third round with Dr. Celestino Adolfo Piotti. Welcome, Doctor. How have you been?
Good day, Mr. Pavel. How are you? How's it going?
Very well. We're here with several things.
Nice to be back, right?
In pleasure as always. Pleasure as always. Well, I think we could start by asking you, because you mentioned that in your book, your research on the Guardian theory was already generating new hypotheses for something different. Do you think you could tell us something related to that, even just a little?
Yes, of course. Look, I had somewhat forgotten about it to focus solely on medicine. But I'll tell you, unfortunately, the incident didn't repeat. And it has only been with two people so far, and I think with no one else, because all the other people I contacted behaved very correctly, seriously, with a certain professionalism which left me satisfied, calm, right? Well, I'll tell you what happened to me one of these past days. I see on the internet a couple from a lady in Mexico. I'll just say that. I won't say the name or the profession either because, when they hear me, it doesn't matter. But you'll understand in communication. She, just like we're communicating now, she was communicating with a journalist or similar profession from Spain, whom I had felt two or three times, had seen some things, but didn't know much about him. Well, I see the notice on the internet that said in our program we are going to try to analyze Dr. Piotter's Guardian theory. Well, I said to myself, wow, what's going on here? I was more interested than anyone else to see what was happening. So, since it was already recorded, it was easy for me to find it and listen to it. And they discussed that topic, let's say, for half the program or something like that. And then they continued with other different topics about the Nazca Mummies. But what amazed me more than anything else was how they read and interpreted many of my topics incorrectly or gave them, let's say, a completely different interpretation. And I have to divide between the two people. First, this gentleman from Spain was very correct. He introduced me well, presented my books, showed the cover photo of my books, a polite presentation, let's say, as it should be. And the other lady was also very polite. But the other person, the lady from Mexico, let's say she was getting more attention until she clearly stated what she thought. And at the end of it all, he kind of gave me the impression like he was in a hurry and said, well, that's enough about Dr. Piotri, we're not going to talk about this anymore. Well, and then I'll tell you what follows. So this person, the lady who claimed she knew all the evolutionary trees of living beings, managed them all, I said, how lucky, I said. Well, she says, reading what my book said, for example, from what I remember, because I'll forget some, she said, for example, well, he talks about Dr. Piotti says that the human being is the most successful being. And she says it can't be. She says because the most successful being I know is some insect, say cockroach or something else, that has lived 4 million years in the world and is more successful because it has lived longer than man. So I said, but how amazing. I said, a cockroach has no soul, no brain, doesn't think, doesn't feel, doesn't have a human body. There is a basic principle of human evolution that says every living being has what it needs to live. An insect with a hard shell on the outside, let's call it that so the person understands me, or that has a shell on the outside, inside is lymph and nothing more because it doesn't need anything more than that. So it can be very successful to live many millions of years, but with the basic existence for it, nothing more. Well, I left it, kept listening. I was amazed and couldn't believe it. Well, then I said later, therefore, I later, unable to respond, I said, but if what I said was that in the Nazca mummies in the future, for me, they inherited 4 limbs and the bipedal form of man, which shows that the previous human was not so bad, that he was quite successful in what? In terms of body shape, for walking and all that, That's what I meant. You understand? Well, nothing understood from the book, from what I said. Then she says somewhere the homos, and I grabbed my head and no, this is too much because it comes from Latin, from the first declension, where homo is the singular homo, if you want. To say it, men have to look for another declension that ends with a different Latin ending, adding a consonant, a vowel or not different. So it's the homo. A person who is in biology, as I said, I think may have learned sometime that I can't say the Pithecus or the Homos, you understand? You have to say the Homo and the Pitheco because it's the proper name of a species. I was also amazed later to say this person, for example, yes, because it has nothing to do, or I don't know what she said, that the Homo erectus, when he takes a stone and learns to be skillful and this and that, and she confused what is the skill of the Homo erectus, which is the first true man, with the skills of the Homo habilis, who was before him, who was a kind of primitive man, who was already incipient for man. And that's the one you have to analyze how he took a stone, changed it, polished it, handled it, and there he becomes skillful. So she also confused human species. And well, what else can I remember? The thing is that I said later the Spanish said this, and well, he says he wants to say that there is a superior species that survives. I never said anything like that. On the contrary, we are becoming extinct. Well, and then he adds, and well, maybe that's why he wants to say the guardian theory, nothing to do with it. Someday, with more time, I'll tell you the origin of the guardian theory, and you'll laugh a little like I do, or if you want, I'll tell you now like I do. Once, many years ago, I entered a valley on the coast of a salt flat called Salar de Embargasta in the north of Cordova, a very large salt flat. On the coast of the salt flat, it's all dense forest, and I entered looking for a skeleton that I wanted to locate, 10,000 years old. I entered a small valley, like a crater, where there was no vegetation, and then I couldn't get out of there because I got lost. And the guide told me, if you can't get out, I'll keep looking for whatever you're doing, make a cloth, a hat, or something on a branch, and I'll come to find you. I laughed because he was making a joke. Well, but what happens is that he was very knowledgeable, very familiar with the area, and I wasn't. So I got lost in that place. And I had a filming machine, an old filming camera, which I have stored. I don't use it anymore, quite large. And at times I turn the camera and point it at myself and say, whoever finds this video knows that I got lost here in case I can't get out. Something happens to me, and this happened to me, this. And I start to narrate my fears that I had to survive at that moment, even though when I go to the inhospitable area, I carry equipment in my vest, in equipment that I look like an astronaut or a soldier going to a gallery, right? I carry all the survival equipment for 1 or 2 days. But even so, I didn't feel comfortable at that moment. I felt scared. So I filmed that SOCOs that was still on a cassette stored somewhere. And I had an American survival knife, Guardian brand, Guardian model, not brand, but model Guardian. So, well, I also carried everything to survive. But when I returned, I was able to get out because I was there for many hours until the guide didn't appear and I was able to get out of the place alone. I returned home and started to think about what had happened to me, about the insecurities, the city man in an inhospitable place, a lot of medical things, right? And I said, well, I'm going to make a theory here. And I said, what name do I give it? And they said, I don't know what name to give it. Here I have this knife called Guardian Model. And I named it the Guardian Model. So nothing to do with what they deduced about why I named it Guardian. Yes, because there is a person who will survive over other species, which I never said. And well, I just listened to the conversation because I said, wow, well, I wish I could be there to let them know what's happening. Then there comes a moment when this lady says, well, she kept, let's say, targeting me, right? Many things. And I saw that my theories were not being fulfilled. I never said those kinds of things. Why? I say. So either she misinterprets me or they interpret, or with malice, I don't know, or she doesn't know how to interpret. Strange in a biologist who won't know things. Well, when the other people more or less have gone free and more or less have understood something, then there comes a moment when this Spanish gentleman, very prudently, as if he had realized, says, well, I think we've talked enough about Dr. Piotr. And he says, and then already Greg, and he says, well, we should send him a message. Hopefully he finds out that he analyzing the new genetics that has appeared with such a biologist. And what do I know? When he knows this thing that maybe when he made the book he didn't know them, he says now he will reconsider and learn something else and will change things and the theory this and that. And then she says, I already told such a biologist that I don't want to name because he is a very good person. I appreciate him. And he already knows because I later talked to him and told him. And then this woman says, well, I have warned such a biologist to talk to him and tell the doctor about the mistakes he has and all these things. So I said, I cut this video and I'm going to talk to such a biologist. And I talk to him and I say, hello, how are you? How are you doing? What do I know? Well, he is one of the biologists who has been with the mummies from the beginning, so very experienced. One person, look, very humble, very simple, because he knows a lot. Well, when he hears this, he will know it's him. And I said, I was waiting for you to call me. Why? For you to tell me what else I have to learn. Because you have a message that they have given you to tell me? No, I don't know anything that they have given me. Nothing. I really don't know. That person didn't tell me any message about anything. You realize? Well, then, that gives me a reason to reflect with you all these things. If you allow me,
Go ahead.
from the moment I speak clearly, if not, it's better not to speak, then the listeners will have to excuse me later and I will make things very clear so that there are no doubts. From the moment I travel to Mexico, as I set foot in Mexico, I realized in the environment that there was 2009, it was all very good, very well prepared, very good people. I made many friends. They treated me very well. They helped me. Well, like what can happen when one is in a country they don't know? So, but there was a small image added there that was noticeable in the environment that some people wanted the Nazca Mummy to be of the origin they desired, extraterrestrial. Clearly, it was evident. Well, then I said, I caught that and said, well, but it's okay because they have dedicated themselves to this, because all their lives they have convinced themselves. And many times the person convinces themselves and is right and continues with their theory. Well, it's a shame they don't leave a small door open for other options, at least in thought. So I always saw that, and I experienced a phenomenon that I will tell about Mr. Jaime Maussan, who I think will not take it badly because I say it with good intention. Besides, I came to appreciate him. You see, I met him at that moment and appreciated him a lot because he treated me very well. A very polite person, has experience, a journalist of many years, and you can see his trajectory as a person of many years. I was at the hotel the day before. We had 3 very good scientific meetings there, and he calls me on the phone because in the first meeting I left him an envelope with the report I wanted to present to the Mexican Chamber of Deputies, addressed to him, to Deputy Gutierrez Luna, in short, to everyone. And my conclusions remained, and they were 3 pages signed by me. I was going to try to repeat those at that moment. Then in the Chamber of Deputies, well, he read it the day before. I gave it to him beforehand. So he calls me on the phone in the afternoon at the hotel and says, well, doctor, he says, what you have presented to me is textbook. He says, it's almost perfect, he says, but no one will understand it. Well, I said I made a mistake. Well, then he says, what we are going to do, he says, because I think it's not like that. He kind of made me understand that he didn't accept much the origin I was saying. And he says, what we are going to do is simpler. I will ask you questions. Well, my response was, well, nothing more. Well, I said, very well, see you, goodbye, until the night when we will meet again very late. As it is not now, I will be at the next meeting. Goodbye. Quote. When I hang up, I comment to my wife who was with me. I say, look, I have the feeling that we have come for nothing. So I say, why does Mr. Maussan pay? Because he paid for a trip for me. It cost me travel and hotel, right? He let's say I have to acknowledge because he helped a lot with that. Well, I took 2 planes from Argentina to there, tiring trip, but a very nice trip, paid by him. And I said, why spend so much money if then he brings me and I will have to submit to 1 or 2 questions and nothing more if I can't express the things that were important to me. And that didn't let me sleep the previous days because of what I discovered according to the measurements that the numbers gave me. You see, right? Well, so much so that, look, when we were behind the Chamber of Deputies, we had a little reception there, lunch, where they offered us some nice things and all that, and there were deputies and important people. And Mr. Mausole seemed to have a cold, and he said, last night I couldn't sleep. He was referring to his cold, his flu. And I went and said, yes, but I know why you can't sleep, because you know what I'm going to say. And that doesn't let me sleep either, because they are revolutionary things that will make my head spin like the kid from The Exorcist, right? Well, because it's a real thing, because it happens to all of us.
It's also where you said it, Doctor, the Mexican Chamber of Deputies. Of course, that's a huge pressure, I imagine.
Well, but saying they were from the future, let's say it made me change. 75 years I had at that moment, 75 years of training. In one day I changed it. Well, then what happened? When the time comes to go up to the podium and I was next to Rangel, Dr. Rangel, the doctor who is the lawyer. I don't remember the name, very good person too, the lawyer who accompanied Mr. Mosani, right? And then all the deputies and so all the others, Dr. Zuniga, further away the sun. I felt happy because I was surrounded by people that I saw the quality of people they all are. When the time comes, they give me a time so I don't go over the time of the next speaker, right? Well, a time to speak. But I got in a bad mood, and nobody knows that now, I comment. I got in a bad mood, not with everyone, but with myself, because things didn't give me the peace at the moment as I wanted them to come out, the most, let's say, clear possible for what I was going to say. So I said like this, because I know myself. When I taught so many years in my life, always at the university there is a bell that rings, and I didn't like the bell. So I said that the professor shouldn't be notified with the bell. So what did I do? I programmed myself mentally, and 1 minute before the bell rang, I ended the class. You see, right? What I had managed to do in so many years. That is achieved in many years of teaching, managing the speaking times one has. Well, here I programmed myself in the same way and said, I will not let it reach the time limit for them to tell me to cut. So what did I do? What you saw in the video, I started talking, and at 2 minutes, 3, I said, here I cut it. I don't want to keep talking about this. And that's it. And there the questions from Mr. Mauser began. Well, from there everything went well, but I was not in the mood. Why? Because they didn't let me say things. I had made such a big trip, so much expense, and they didn't let me speak more clearly about things so that people know why things are. Luckily, later when he asked, I did clarify more things and all this, right? There was a lot to clarify. But what already put me in a bad mood was when I said, why did I come here if they are not going to let me speak? Then I could speak because of his questions, but for example, I would have liked to speak like the other 2 doctors and the other researchers who presented this, etc. And they all spoke very well, which is very true. Let's say I felt restricted, and then I said, how am I restricted? I will restrict myself more, I will lock myself more in myself, I will speak 2 minutes, I said, and nothing more. And Mr. Maussan, let's say without realizing it, fixed my bad mood by asking me questions. So I extended myself more to speak. But I was willing to cut everything off because I said, no, if I come to speak like this, it's not worth coming here. You see? So, well, now that's what normally happens to me in medicine with research at the university. Here it happens much more when this is international and is based on something that is much more, let's say, I will use the word fabulous than medicine. And that will change our world. It will break and rebuild after these things. Well, so let's say that's what happened. But in the meantime, I already knew and was realizing that there were certain people who wanted it to be from there, and I would have liked to please them, but I couldn't lie. I had to say what it gave me. Well, so I want to send a small message now, since we are talking about this, to these gentlemen who are ufologists, or who study those things, or who study flying saucers, or who study beings that come from other galaxies, all those things, right? Tell them two things. First, that mine is not ufology, it's not flying saucer. I don't know anything about that. I wish I knew about that, because maybe I would have more elements. Well, but unfortunately, medicine didn't allow me to dedicate myself to something else, and more when I might not be able to investigate in any way. I wouldn't know how to investigate something like that. Well, it's easier to study medicine than that. And so, for me, according to the mathematical measure, this is what you already know that I said, and I have said in the book and in your videos and in the Chamber of Deputies, that for me it comes from the future. They are of our evolved species. Well, now I leave a hope to these ufologists that they think about the previous being, then they won't get upset, then they will see that within my theory, which is not for the Pleiades or Ganymede or I don't know where, but here they think and study the previous being too, because it is the only being that is not terrestrial and that is contemplated in my medicine. The third genetics that there is, that Dr. Rangel says, of monkey, of man, and of unknown gene, for me it is the previous one. So I want to send them that greeting, and that, let's say, to have patience with me and to understand and comprehend that I am not in disagreement with everything they say, because I don't even know about the subject, but I contribute with someone, the previous being, which is the basis of all human evolution for me, in my theory, and that is not human, that came from outside and then left. You see? Well, so at least with that, I am giving them another piece of information, contributing to their science, so they don't get mad at me when I talk about this theory, which doesn't fit with what they believe it to be and all those things like that.
No, but Piotti, there are many, many different types of phenomena that all these people are studying. And for me, because what catches my attention the most about what you are doing is that all the atmosphere that surrounds Jaime. Maussan, he is a journalist of 50 years, 50 something years of career who dedicated his whole life to ufology. And I feel that over so many years, well, he became an institution that, whether you like it or not, is already part of a machinery. He no longer, although he makes most of the decisions, I think, I imagine, I also believe that there is that certain type of pressure to continue presenting a product to the audience he already has, that they want to know about these things, you know. So for me, that you have arrived and reached the conclusions you reached on your own, independently investigating the case. For me, that makes your case much more interesting to investigate than that of a machinery that already has a fixed destination, already has fixed what they want this to be. For me, what you are doing is much more interesting.
Well, look, I don't usually like to talk about people by naming them, but to be clear and with good intentions, the journalist. Mr. Jaime Maussan is excellent in my opinion. His career is evident, and I recognize it at first glance. I haven't met anyone dedicated to this who surpasses him. To me, he's international, and you can see the effort he puts in, how he uses methods and forms and moves his machinery towards it, and it works out well for him. And well, I think he's very respectable. Now, there's the issue that I can't say everything is as he says. It might be, it might not be. That's why I say I don't stray from medicine. And I think he's even done, look, he even has a benefactor action on certain people who follow him, certain listeners, because some people find peace and tranquility thinking about these things. So now I'm going to show you, I've brought here, just in case they talked about this topic, sorry. I'm going to show you two photographs that I've brought, which I also dedicate to them, to the people involved in all this ufology and all these things. And I'll even tell you what I think. Look at this closely. Well, that's the tower of a Capuchin church in Cordova, the Church of the Sacred Heart. In the year, excuse me, not the year, I haven't put the year, well, about 12 or 13 years ago, it was my grandson's baptism. So I was with my son, who has some very nice cameras, the one with all this equipment I'm talking about now. And he had a Nikon camera there in the Nikon hotel, very professional. And he tells me he's going outside because the ceremony was over. A lot of people, not the ceremony, the liturgy, a lot of people. And he says he's going to take a picture of the church tower. So he focuses on the church tower, and here it appears. You won't see it here. I already saw what it says.
Trajectory first time and then below UFO.
There's a little white dot. So he took it, and then I'll show you the other one. The tower came out with one dove below that couldn't be printed here. Well, and then I took out Maria. And then when he came to his house and we developed it, he tells me, look at what's seen far away up there. And you see a long dot, like a disc on its side in one of the photos. And there's another one where it makes a turn down and then goes up in the next photo, which goes up above the tower, right? This would be the other 2009.
There, you can see the point well. Look. Okay.
So what's the conclusion of this?
If it went up a lot and is very fast,
Well, it went up a lot, and listen, it wasn't visible to the naked eye. The camera saw it because it was so small that we didn't even notice when the machine was pointed upwards.
and this photo is yours, then you took them?
Of course, my son took them, my son. Well, and for example, well, and there might be another one that was taken at some point, right? Well, in another place. So one is not unfamiliar with these things. But when I saw this photo, I didn't start investigating because I said, how do I investigate that? No, as a doctor, I don't get there. Well, but I dedicate this photo to them so they can see that one is not in the opposite position of nullifying everything or trying not to fulfill their wishes, nor the theories they have or the desires and things, etc., etc. Do you realize? So that's the intention I have in showing you this. So this is what I want to tell you. I want through you to send a message to those types of people who I know listen to your video and all these things. So you have to separate the two things. One thing is what medicine says and another what other sciences say. Unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know how to see it, but I can only say one. But I don't deny the other. I don't know what it is and what it will be. I don't deny that maybe they come from the future if we're going to theorize that way or another. That's never known. Maybe a lot of time will pass until we see what's really happening. But I want the people who say they might be bothered because my theory deviates from theirs to see that I don't. If I deviate, it's not with bad faith, nor to fight, nor to ruin theirs. And I even send this photo to share with them and think about the previous being, which won't be one of theirs. Do you realize?
Yes, yes. I wanted to comment that I also find your theory very interesting in the sense that there's another anthropologist whom I had already mentioned off the air named Michael Masters from the University of Montana. And he has two books, one called Identified Flying Objects, but in English, and the other is called The Extratempestrial Model. And that's where he develops a theory where he also talks about humans from the future, but he approaches it from the point of view of trying to explain these objects in the air as possible and potential time machines. And it's very interesting. I find it very interesting, 2009, that he reached a theory similar to yours, but from the side of technology or these objects, and you reached it from the side of these bodies and bone measurement, specifically the skulls, which is your specialty.
And look, adding another thing, measuring bone and having as bone patterns the current human being or the evolution of the entire human being. So, for that biologist who had opinions about me, we also serve for something, right? The skull of current humans as a pattern to understand the others. I see that she's going to criticize that too. Do you realize? So, well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. And I think we have a telepathic connection that we think the same and we find ourselves with the same phrase, right? You, son?
Well, I'll tell you something that if I have to be more honest, well, I've always been honest with you and I always am, but something I've been holding back a bit because for me, the only reason I keep thinking there's a possibility that the small bodies are real and once lived is because of you and because you told me you had seen one on some occasion. But it's also true that there are already very specialized scientists in other areas studying these bodies who are very much decided or almost convinced that this whole alpaca head thing and all this, right, that we've talked about many times, but the only reason I still leave that possibility very open is because of everything you've told us here on the channel, which I thank you very much for.
I think based on what you tell me, my response is simply I've been led by the measurements that the black one, and as I said, when I was at the Spanish hospital, you son, seeing the mummies that are there, I told Mrs. Chirica that if they are fake and assembled, we will have to give the Nobel Prize to the one who assembles them.
Yes, yes, yes. And especially because they put the carbon date 2000 years ago. I mean, they assembled them back then, right?
And because very easily one compares them with socio-human patterns. So it's more than a genius who assembled them, not a common sculptor, nor a common artist. So on one hand, you have to say yes, it's a person who took the seriousness of the whole world lightly, but on the other hand, you have to give them a Nobel Prize before anyone else. Zweitausendein. Well, then, as long as I keep getting numerical responses from the bones, I'll keep saying it. When I manage that the bones no longer respond to me or respond with numerical incoherences, then I say, no, this is as far as I go. Here it's already something strange that doesn't fit.
Listen, doctor, have you reviewed already talking about bones, more specifically about this little body? Have you reviewed the pelvis area, all that hip area? Because I've heard some scientists and in some chats I'm in talk about that specific part as not having much coherence. Have you had a chance to see it?
No, I haven't seen more than what's known about that, no, because of lack of time and element factor. Because when I got the skull x ray, I went to the skull, which is what I always do. I've heard that the joints are very simple and wouldn't have enough movement, let's say. But, well, on the other hand, I always say, but we're facing something exceptional. It could also be that it's never as we imagine things to be. And there's one thing I just remembered, which isn't scientific, but I'm going to speculate a bit. Do you remember what I saw? What I saw that was so hard for me, and I forgot for many years, even today, at this moment, I doubt if I should have told it because of what people might say, because of one's upbringing, because I come from the last century, and that thing from the last century was talking about things that didn't fit. So if I have to speculate on that too, I say, what did I see? You see? Because I repeat, I assure you I saw it, I haven't lied about anything, and I have no interest in lying, whether you believe it or not. Well, but that happened to me, and it wasn't a situation I sought out. No, it happened to me, and I don't know why it happened to me. You see? And I say it's not scientific because I can't prove it. But if, let's see, if they put me in a truth detection machine, a lie detector, I think I'd come out clean telling the truth because I'm not lying. Unless the machine malfunctions. You see? Well, then I tell you, I show myself frankly because in these kinds of things that are going to change and have already changed the way of thinking, at least I haven't caused a stir of doubts. I have no reason to hide anything else. I have to be very clear, otherwise, it's no good.
Yes, indeed, yes. Do you think so? Yes, because the truth is I want to see this with you. Let's share the screen to see what new things you researched about the pigeon mummy's skull, where you got these photographs, these x-rays to start.
Here we go. Now comes the topic. Listen, I'm going to ask you an indiscreet question. Do you and I have telepathy? Because again, I know you asked me as if I had told you before how everything was. Well, keep it in mind just in case. Well, look, I'll tell you by talking about this topic, I'm not only speaking personally, I'm speaking as a medical researcher member of the Inkari Institute. Why? Because Mr. Thierry Hamming has honored me by making me a member of the Inkari Institute to investigate. We are few members. There's another doctor from Mexico, two biologists, an American paleontologist, two biologists from Mexico, and I don't want to forget anyone, but well, they are doctors. One physicist from France. So what I'm going to show you now is what I've been investigating. And this X-ray was sent to me by Mr. Thierry Hamming for me to continue investigating this case.
Very well. Can you see what I'm showing here on the screen? If this was the first one you sent me,
Yes, I have it here. So the same, I'll see it closer here to tell you. Very well, just a minute.
first I'm sending you the first one you sent me, which is the one I have on the screen, right? Now the one with the drawn nose.
Well, look, first let's go, let's say, with the basics. Look at the shape of the skull, comparing the shape of the skull that Paloma has, which I still can't determine the sex, and that will come with time, but if you compare it, that's the norm. That would be what in craniometry is called Camper's lateral norm, the way to see the skull in a lateral form. So we have the image at first glance, a bit copying Blumenbach, who was the founder of the specialty of anthropology and medical physics back in the 1800s in Europe, in Germany. He used to say that phrase at first glance. Well, at first glance, the skull is a supermodern skull of a current man or a current person, modern man or woman. Nothing to do with the skull shape of Maria and Montserrat. So when I see it, I say, oh, I say before measuring the skull, but I'm already seeing that Paloma has a skull of a current man, I say. But when I start measuring, I get goosebumps. Because one thing is to see the shape of the skull, and another thing is what the numbers tell you afterward. And that's why I come back here, not to argue, but to clarify when DNA is done, that DNA can give you a hint of a being's form according to the genetic evolution it has, but many times that being then in the individual's body hides the DNA so much and seems like something different. That's why DNA is very useful, but it's also useful to go to cranial measurements and much more so in vivo. Why? Because DNA doesn't reflect in the body what it really should reflect. So you have the height in red from the base, the height in red, let's say, from the base of the skull to the cranial vault. It's a being with a high cranial vault, very developed. What would be the base of the skull? The base of the skull is not the base you see there from where the cervical spine starts, but the base of the skull is oblique. It goes from the cervical spine and ascends to above the orbit, right? Well, so that would be the base of the skull. That base of the skull in the ancient Pithecus in primitive monkeys, in prehistoric man, in all human species and in current man, that base, which I repeat, is not a horizontal base, but is oblique, ascending towards the face, has hardly varied from monkey to man, very little. And yet, here I'm going to show you how it changed suddenly. Well, then, look, if we go to the profile of the nose, which I have drawn as if I had given it the thickness of what would be the scalp, the skin, right? So from the nose up, we have a face flattened backward, flat, flattened, but flat, and where the glabella is called, which would be the space between the eyebrows, the space of the skull in the middle, between the two eyebrows or between the two upper edges of the orbits is flattened, is erased, and below that, immediately there is a point where the nose begins, which would be the union of the nasal bones with the lower part of the frontal bone, where the point that in medicine is called the nasal. Well, there it is, so little marked in such a way that the space between the eyebrows, that is what in us is very marked as a small indentation above the nose before the forehead starts upwards, here it is practically erased. So a flattened face, but only up to where the upper jaw begins, because then further down there is a great prognathism, a very large marked prognathism of the upper jaw and less of the lower jaw, which also has one, but it is less. For example, when Paloma bit, the upper incisors did not meet the lower incisors, there would be a space there between the two. That is a masticatory deficiency or occlusion that is called manifest, which is often seen in some people also from our current era. Well, after that, what would be after the nation point? Further up, if we go down, we will see the height, what is called from the nasal spine, which is noted there. Some vertical up to the nation, and it would be the height of the nose. And then further down from the prostion, which would be from the upper edge of the incisors to the nation, above would be the height of the face. Well, and further up at the height of the orbit, there is a white spot that comes out obliquely forward, which would be part of the bones, that part of the nasal bones, which in that case, if one projects it straight, inclined forward, in a straight line, it will give us a very large nose. Therefore, it would have an aquiline nose, as I marked there, because it would have to have a very large nasal cartilage of the middle nasal septum, and the nose would tend to fall forward.
Eagle nose.
Of course, that is it's aquiline because if it was straight, it would come out very, very large, and forward it would come out very, let's say, very advanced from the face forward. Well, then for me, it has been an aquiline nose. This, in terms of X-ray, we would have to see cranial measurements in vivo, right? Well, but we already have something here. Then, well, that's the thing we're going to see. Does it have small orbits? What else do I see here? The Frankfurt plane is one that is there below the orbit, that with the Frankfurt plane is rather low. So it has above a very large cranial development. And there is a part that protrudes, which is the part of the nape, let's say the part of the occipital at the back, that which is much larger than the part of the cranial vault of the lambda that is called higher up. And well, and it has a great development of balance because there is a very large development possibly of the cerebellum. And this is reminding me, did you know who this reminds me of? The little ones of 60 centimeters that are going to come later, because they also have a very large cerebellum development. Tell me if I'm going to think that they are of skull and llama when they are similar to this. Wow. So if you want, we can continue a discussion until the end of the ages where we will see which one is right in which one. But I say it in terms of the measurements I make. It resembles a lot. It resembles a lot. And then when I explain the Melker angle to you, we will see that it is very similar to those of the little ones of 60 centimeter to the that I call the ostentum prudens, right? The one that presents prudently. Well, you'll see why. Because of how the numbers give me in terms of angular measurements. So let's continue here. What else can I tell you? In the lower jaw forward, here, lower down in the angle, that angle there. Well, there we have an angle of 91 degrees that I marked, which is greater than the one Montserrat has. And that is, it has a very forward protrusion of the lower jaw. Montserrat has it a little 80 something. It gave me a little less. In this case, the edge of the lower jaw is already very vertical, and the posterior edge of the jaw of 128 degrees also gives me greater than in Montserrat, because possibly, I say I can't be wrong, possibly this is a jaw of a young person, where the posterior angle is more towards the straight, and as it gets older it becomes more oblique, more obtuse. That I have to measure in future measurements. That's a simple advance that I can be wrong later, right? So when I see those things, I understand. Well, here I later mark the width of the ascending branch of the jaw. Above the 128, there is a horizontal that says that I already see the thickness of the ascending branch of the lower jaw and things like that. Well, and so then I have achieved, let's say that in the first image, this, okay?
Let's move on to the next one. Well, the next one is the one with fewer drawings, right?
Then I added more drawings on top and passed another new one. Well, in that one, the first thing I marked is the Welker angle, which is 113 degrees, okay? 113 degrees. I brought my own book to remind myself because sometimes I forget the measurements. So I say that in Maria's case, the Werker angle is 152 degrees and here it's 113. And if I look at the imprudent ostentation, it should be less, but I'm closer to it than to Maria.
Okay.
Well, here I have to go back. I would have to look again in the book. So here I put next to it, for example, the Walker angle in the Pithecus and monkey, 149 degrees. That's also in my book, 149 degrees to 174. It's very obtuse. In monkeys and pithecines, in Homo, the Homo sapiens, and the previous ones, a bit less, a bit more, it gives me 133 degrees to 144, and in pigeon, it gives me 113. Look, I want to express in one sentence what just happened to me. All the evolution of 3 million years, 2.5 million, I changed it in a short span of time, and I got closer to 2009, to the abrupt dehumanization, let's say, and I got closer to the next species that will come from these short ones of 60 centimeters, the Tentoiprudes, because that measurement is closer to them than to Maria or Montserrat. So I say, what's happening to me? A skull that I see, the contour it has, super modern current from this era, from our era, but when I measure it, I grab my head and my head spun 360 degrees, like I repeat, like the kid in the Exorcist movie, to say something funny. It blew my mind. Because in a school that I see modern, human, and when I measure it inside, nothing to do with it, I'm getting closer to the end of human dehumanization. So, what is it that
Most catches my attention about this, doctor? Knowing why or how all these beings were together, or if they buried them there, or how it was, if they are so divided in this.
I told Mr. Teria to tell me more or less, but he told me little whether they had all been together or if they were in the nearby territory with each other. And he made me understand that they weren't a cave but a cavern, but that they were tunnels, where in different tunnels some were separated. That's what I understood. More than that, I don't know. So I say one thing to this pigeon skeleton, urgently we have to do carbon 14. No, sorry, we have to do, yes, well, carbon 14 and see if the age matches and then do the DNA. And from what I'm going to see here ahead, look, I above here when I mark the Yusan, that's the last one. Well, when I mark the Eckel angle, the last one, let's see, because the angle there is that same one. Because the worker angle serves to differentiate how the skull grows with the face.
Okay. Here, this one with this one. No, here the.
Of 113 is the Walker angle. What is it for? In 1850, it was used to distinguish and in bad medicine. Why? Because it was a discriminatory medicine. To distinguish the difference and make discrimination between the white being of white skin and the black. Because at that time they were colonialists and the black was considered half semi-monkey and the white was the perfect one. But I no longer take that as a pattern. So now I use it for what? To demonstrate that everything that is skull and everything that is face, how one grows with the other, in human evolution. So when the monkey was a monkey and the primitive man, the skull was smaller and the Walker angle was more obtuse, much more than 113 degrees, as I said here. It reached up to 174 in monkey and 144 in man as a maximum extreme. Well, why? Because the underdeveloped skull with a poor brain was small and corresponded to a larger face. When evolution comes, and in this that Mexican biologist criticized me because she said it couldn't be that it shrinks and then the skull enlarges. Well, it doesn't matter. When the human being evolves, the skull enlarges because the brain that houses it needs more space. Because there is more development of reasoning, there are a series of new functions. So, the body has to give cavity to the brain, the skull becomes large, but the face shrinks. And that evolution that has been seen in man, what does it end in? In the short ones of 60 centimeters in height, where the face is extremely small and the skull extremely large. Tell me if it doesn't descend from us. Another argument I give you. Well, then in this case there is a genetic anarchy like Maria and Montserrat have. Why? Because the skull is large, but the face remains large too. That prognatism and that lower jaw, which is almost the jaw of an American pampid, which I can explain later what it is, should be smaller already with a Werker angle of 103 degrees. It should be smaller because it is already at the feet of future human evolution and at the end of future human evolution of the Homo somos. That's why I called it that. So it doesn't make sense to have such a large maxilla as in the time of the American Pampids when they crossed the Bering Strait. They reached America because that already happened. And that already happened and shrank in the Homo sapiens sapiens. And then comes the Homo sapiens sapiens dissimilis, which I presented in my doctoral thesis in 2001, which was the one that, with all feet, let's say, revolutionized and stirred all the genetics and made the human being a total mix of strange things. So the ancient typologies of human skeletons disappeared. And why? And then what happens? When I see this here, this is the fruit of the consequence of the Homo sapiens sapiens dissimilis, which allows the previous being to act again and want, let's say, to modify the species. And before the human being disappears, it gives me the anarchy of having a large skull. A large skull in a large face that doesn't match. It doesn't have to be a small face.
When you talk about the previous being acting, what do you mean? It acts again. What do you mean?
I hope I can explain it. Well, look, for me, hey, the monkey, as I said in Mexico, the monkey doesn't have the capacity by itself to give the human species and to maintain the human species as it has been until now. So I calculate that not in the Australopithecus lucy, but in the Australopithecus robustus, which comes after the African, about 500,000 years later, more or less, which then comes the Homo habilis. Well, there a genetic action of a being occurs that for me is not from here, that contributed the genetics that allows man to be man. Because the monkey alone doesn't give it, let's say, it doesn't have genetic strength. That's what I think. And I also think it not because I want to have a pleasant movie to tell, but because I live measuring skulls all my life. And that has given me that. That's why I proposed, Yusan, in my thesis, the Homo sapiens sapiens dissimile, because it derives from all this, which is the man who changes everything and who is walking among us now. So let's go back. That Homo, that previous being, I named it previous being to give it a name, to identify it. But for me, it has tridactyly, it has bilateral olecranon perforation, it has hyperbasal sacrum. All that is from my thesis, and the Faculty of Medicine of Cordova accepted it. Well, it has a longer forearm like the Amerindians than the arm, when the rest of the world is equal or smaller. It has a longer tibia than the femur, when in the rest of the world the femur is shorter, longer than the tibia. And currently it also has something else. Well, then I'm going to remember something else. So he contributes that, and the monkey contributes The olecranon perforation. That is, the previous scene has the closed olecranon perforation. The monkey contributes open perforated olecranon, hyperbasal sacrum, the different forearm too, the shorter lower limbs, and things like that.
So the Homo habilis already had the gene of the previous being. From there to here was the first Homo habilis.
But what happens? I describe it in the book. What happened? For me, when the previous being genetically joins with the monkey, they are compatible because the other is not a monkey, I say. So one was undifferentiated with another, and then there could be a descent. When the other human types come, it's like seeing a, I'm going to say it figuratively, as if a consanguinity of a being that already had those functions with its own children, who are the descendants of the monkey, occurs. So it's not easy to change their genetics again, acting genetically again. So it gives attempts to want to modify the human species and doesn't succeed until the previous being comes, the Homo sapiens dissimilis comes, which changes the genetics, which has a tall man with a small head when he should have a large head, a short man with a large head, a man with a large jaw and the smaller maxilla, and so on. Well, you son all that anarchy that makes the true primitive pure human skeletal typologies coming out of Africa with the four mitochondrial haplogroups A, B, C, and D totally intact, that reached South America. So this Homo sapiens sapiens dissimile disrupts everything. So at this moment we have, for example, a person with black hair and blue eyes, use and green eye, a blonde person with black eye, and so on, to say many examples of this. They have less reproduction than the Homo. Sapiens sapping of how much to have children, for example, or there is a tendency they're leaving to have children, and so on. And it integrates into the social and cultural, religious, human part with all the new biology, which is a stir of things, to dismantle everything that is normal until now in the human species as we all know it. So he is the one who allows that in front of all the species that were already genetically differentiated, that is differentiated, that are like that and cannot change, or that change very long term. The Homo sapiens sapiens becomes undifferentiated again and behaves genetically like the monkey. So the previous being can re-enter genetically there, trying to give new species. And for me, it attempted this species of the Nazca Mummy, which was a species that was frustrated, that didn't progress genetically. They are failed attempts. And why? Because in those evolutionary niches that I talk about in my theory of evolution, opposed to Darwin, where I put the irreversible involutive theory of my name, I say that when the being didn't mature enough, it has to return to the evolutionary niches and go back evolving, mature, and then continue again. In this mummy, it was frustrated. It was frustrated. So a new species is frustrated. Why? Because it wasn't the moment, for a series of causes that, well, it's long to talk about, and some I can talk about and others not. But that for me will happen in the future, because in the future it will be conducive to form the Homo de Somos, which is what I'm saying.
I want to stay a little on this topic because Phil, you don't remember that I just sent you the video with the biologist Rangel that we talked about hybridization, not hybridization? If I wanted to ask you this intervention you talk about of the previous being, don't you think this is hybridization because you and Rangel say it was natural? Yes, it's 5,000 then, but this isn't part of that.
But I refer to what I told Mr. Maussan, and it's recorded in the House of Representatives. Did he ask if it was a hybridization or artificial manipulation? No, I said it's natural manipulation. Natural hybridizations take thousands of years and end in involution because they can't have offspring. The zygotes get exhausted. So, artificial hybridization, besides not existing back then, is abrupt and didn't happen now. It's been a natural hybridization over thousands of years. And it's such a subtle change that if you look, you see humans still and don't notice changes. I just started seeing, I see it on the screen here, the dove. I'm seeing it and see a modern man's skull and can't imagine the evolution inside. But when I measure it, I hold my head. So humans have secrets. You don't see how they evolve, you see them. And since our life is short, just a few years, and because we don't focus on what we should nor prepare to study, we see humans still like statues. But evolution goes inside and goes slowly. But once it starts, it doesn't stop. Well, so I think that's how I see the previous being, right? Well, and that previous being I also placed in those cycles of Earth's appreciation of 26,000 and some years that are already described with waves that activate and depress, like a spinning top that doesn't stop and reactivates, which is the Earth's movement while it spins. Well, in some of those spaces where Earth is favorable, that genetics appears again and tries to do what to manage the evolution of the being called man. That's what I'm talking about.
Speaking of which, there's a book by a Spanish Jesuit parapsychologist named Salvador Freixedo. I'll pass it to you later. He wrote it all in Spanish. He has a theory that says we're a farm, he says, a genetic farm. And he alludes to what you're telling me that every certain time something comes to play with our genetics. You're saying these are cycles of 26,000 years.
Yes, yes. Look, something very curious happened to me, and it's in the book, luckily. I didn't forget to put it starting from 2024 when I published the book and went 26,000 and some years back and landed on the evolution of Homo sapiens. I went 26,000 years back, landed on the evolution of Homo erectus. Then I went 26,000 years and landed on habilis. How can it be that I land? I said, but no, I'm doing things wrong. Why does it land so precisely? I didn't invent anything. I just added 26 years, 26, 26, and some, and it kept landing. Where for everyone, let's say, our world knows that each species appeared. So what's happening to me?
This is strong what you're telling me, Piotr.
But listen, but I spent days without sleeping, you said. And I said, but no, should I say it or not? And I didn't do anything else. I just added 26, 26, 26, and some, and he kept giving me more. And I never stayed. Isolated from landing near the theoretical beginning of when more or less such or such a species appeared. And I'll tell you something else. Sometimes one speaks why and says that the previous being was at a certain time and not all over the world, but possibly, I don't know. Let's suppose near Nazca, only near Peru. So then I say from Peru, it was known in Chile by some pictography that is separate. In Argentina, there's only one I know of so far, and in Peru, there's the rest. Everything is like that. But I say in the rest of the world, I don't know anything. But I say this when the action of the previous being was there. The skull wasn't deformed. So much so that in Maria and Montserrat, there's no skull deformation. But in the intermediate stages, where it doesn't have the action or it doesn't appear, or isn't there the beings living in that time remembering something of their genetic memory or perhaps ancient beliefs of their ancestors did deform their skulls? Why to resemble the others who didn't deform in Ukraine, like Maria and Montserrat? So I come walking from Peru now to Argentina and to Cordoba. Here I found, well, then I find that the skulls of our Aborigines and the prehistoric man of Cordoba, which reaches 10,000 to 12,000 years, always have the skull deformed, but deformed in a very particular way, which is the lambdoid plagiocephaly, meaning it deforms more on one side and less on the other. So it's not deformed backward, but twisted to one side. But he's the only one in the world, the man of Cordoba, who wore the headbands, and many said no, the headband twisted, so they didn't realize, and the deformation came out wrong. No, nothing to do with it. They wore the headband twisted, knowing they put it twisted to deform on one side only. But meanwhile, there are the Nachi Indians from the south of the Mississippi. From Mexico, I found two of them and have the skulls in a glass box, which I had for teaching, which I found in a burial with Mekingon from here in Cordoba, which have the most perfect deformation that exists, which is totally symmetrical, famous among the Nacha Indians. So, what I'm getting at is that cranial deformations weren't for decoration. It was wanting to represent that which they missed or knew something happened. Because if you measure and see the shape of the deformation of Montserrat or Maria, it looks like an oblique tabular deformation, only it doesn't have the marks on the frontal and occipital from the pressure of the headbands to deform. It's natural. But let's say the occipital is of an oblique deformation, similar to the oblique deformation of Patagonia or northern Argentina, the Chaco area and all that, Mesopotamia area. Well, and I'll tell you something, and after this, if there's time, I don't know if there will be time, we'll touch on the topic of the groups very briefly. But in Cordoba, there's an influence from Patagonia, Tierra del Fuego, de Mapuche, Chile, or northern Chaco and Peru regarding skull evolution and tooth evolution, not to mention. But here it was already deformed, wasn't it? And that deformation coincides with times not contemplated within those 26 years I keep adding. It's in between. So I get an idea that there's a memory of something they wanted to remember, those beings who didn't have cranial deformation but wanted to resemble their skulls.
Doctor, do you think we also have that gene but already more diluted, or do we not have it?
First, I don't know if it's a certain gene, I don't know much about that, but I believe the human being retains memory of their ancestors in many things, especially in the survival of the body and the survival of what happened to me in the forest that time when, let's say, when the situation is serious, the base of human survival appears, which is very primitive in man. And sometimes the reminiscence appears in the memory of those ancestral genes. I think maybe yes.
Okay. Still, it's very diluted. Who knows, right? That's why we're already declining evolutionarily.
What dilutes everything is cultural changes and the adaptation of modern man to survive. Because in the long run, what happens to us now is nothing more than adapting to say, please, I want to keep living. Which in the man of before, let's say, was more natural, had a natural world beside him, didn't have a cell phone, didn't have a communication medium like ours. And they spent all day scraping a stone to make fire. But beside them, they had all nature lived much less time. Well, but maybe man always had to live a short time. We've extended it now with all the eagerness to survive and prevail and all the medical advances at what cost. One must always think about that.
I also think that was generated thanks to a fear of death that emerged within human philosophy, which is very anthropy too.
And the punishment after death. Yes, or the glory after death. So I have to behave well because if not, I'll go to hell. Well, I don't want to get into religion. I speak in the social part. I speak in the social part, you said. But I think, well, I don't want to talk about that topic. I think if he's so omnipotent, well, he's very good for everyone. We have nothing to fear. But as you say, we cling to the material part and don't want to let go. And there's something else. We cling to being the only ones and the first and the best and don't want to see how we're changing and that later another comes or that there's another who already came and is waiting for us to give him space. Yes, well, but all these things that seem, I don't like philosophy, much less do I like craniometry, but I talk about this. Why? Because the numbers are telling me that. I don't invent anything there. I take the protractor and it gives me what I mark. When I measured on the protractor the day before yesterday, 113, and when I measured the Ecker angle or 90, I wanted to tear up the papers. And you know what it does? Look, I'll confess something. When I take the Eckel measurements, which are old measurements, and Haeckel made them to see how the cranial vault was growing. I take it for that and for some other little thing. So I kind of modify it. I invented, let's say, besides the measurement of the angle of that, to not enter my own errors, I invent, as I put here, I invent an angle for example, the false opistocranium. The opistocranium would be that red line that goes from the top of that's the longest distance, the maximum diameter of the skull, that maximum diameter to see if it's dolichocephalic, brachycephalic, making a formula. But that skull, that diameter favors one of the sides of the Ecker angle. So that angle gave me 90. To check if I was wrong, I put Y, the opistocrano, and Piotr's false market below, and it gave me 82. The angle is my own invention to guide myself. When it gave me 82, I said I'm not far off, I'm at ease. From 82 to 90, there's nothing. It's the same as when I draw the line upwards, up to the green one that's slanted. That angle is another invention of mine to see the skulls with. It gave me the angle of it, which was 189. It got close to human, close to the white race human. Be careful with what I'm saying with all respect to the term white race. It's the skull of a current white race person, but with the same angle as the men of the future. Do you see the anarchy I'm seeing? Let's go back to what you told me before. You follow me and consider me only because of me, because of the Lama's head. Thank you very much. How do you expect me to think otherwise if I'm seeing this? Yes, I'm seeing it similar to what's going to happen to the little Lama's head. Am I still the only one in the world who says no, but is deceived and doesn't want to admit it? I can't admit it because the numbers give me differently. You see? Thanks for the support. Am I the only one who still doesn't believe in the 2009 Lama?
No, there are many who don't believe in.
The Lama, but I speak simply, not so medically so you understand, but sincerely about what's happening. Look at that angle, that green diameter up to the top, which gives the height of Basio Bregman, which would be all right. With that, I'm differentiating three types, going back to the classic structure of the human cranial skeleton, which the Homo sapiens APIs dissimilar has destroyed. I go back and say when man arrived in America through the Bering Strait, there are three types of skeletal typology, the Pampids, the Andids, the Lagids, one secondary, which would be the Huarpids in San Juan here in Argentina. The Pampids had this characteristic of having a high cranial vault. The Lagids from Lagoa Santa in southern Brazil are similar but have a lower skull height, a more flattened vault. Then come the Andids like the Peruvians, those from northern Argentina, Bolivian, typical of the Andid shorter round skull, brachycephalic. Then there's another one I mentioned, the Huarpid, a mix between Andid and Lagid. That's why it's called, because there's a mix, a genetic cranial conjunction where Homo sapiens sapiens Laguanus Huarpids appears, wise man. Wise because from the case, come here, it is already like that. Lagoanus, because it derives from Lagoa Santa in Brazil. Huarpids, because they are from the Huarpes Indians of San Juan and also have this characteristic. With that I'm studying Yusan and that which deformed in the skulls, which you may not recognize, but had a skull similar to this current one. With those measurements, I recall everything that was the era, the golden age of the human species, where they came with four mitochondrial groups A, B, C, and D, the same from Africa. I explained once that when they were walking through the continents, those who never stopped and reached South America arrived intact the genetics. Those who stopped were killed by the glaciations, formed peoples, and descended in stature and lost the length of the forearm, lost the head in this way, and transformed into the modern humans who later came to invade America, who were our cousins, who came to invade us who were there much earlier than them because they stayed there forming, let's say, tribes and cities. Then in the rest of the continents, that typology of the four mitochondrial groups, at least in South America, which are intact because there were no glaciers here, but great rains, they didn't die. Why? A and B were first in the plain, the seed in the mountain. As new migrations passed before Columbus and after the Vikings, who reached Greenland and nothing more. But there was also a journey, migrations, that science does not describe. But no one even imagines how they crossed from one place to another. But there were migrations, so they were mixing. And then it becomes those who were in the mountains of 6D became D in the plain. But never was the genetics of the Nazca mummies found. In Peru to the north, the surroundings, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina, have a typology of the four mitochondrial groups inherited from the mother, from the DNA, from the cellular cytoplasm, from the mitochondria, and not those of the father that are in the nucleus, for example. Those that are the most important because they transmit all the genetic inheritance are an open book that is written every day in each generation. There is no trace of the USAN mutations or the genetics found in the Nazca mummy. The Nazca mummy for me is a special remnant, and I'm deducing that they weren't living in Nazca for a long time.
At least that's what makes me say.
That at least an attempt to say something that maybe I can change. But so far, going back like this for the following, when Maria has the loss of 3 molars in the lower jaw and the resorption of the alveoli, there is a larger space at first. It was said, even there in Mexico with the Chamber of Deputies, that it had been a manipulation of a dentist of the time. What do I know? No, it's not just that Maria is losing those molars. Somehow they break, then they get infected. It's not surprising that they were removed because at the time, a few years ago, in the more primitive era, it was tied with a tooth or something and tied to one side and hit the shot and the teeth were removed. So what happens? She loses those 3 molars and then comes a period of resorption that according to the studies I have done, can be delayed in up to 5 or 6 years to resorb the alveoli and up to 10 years to resorb. If Maria lost only 1 molar, well, it started to resolve already. It takes 10 years or 6 years, 5. If another one falls, it's 5 more years, 4. If another one falls, it's so many more years. You have to add them all. It's like 25, 30 years. If they fell together, well, we only add 10 years, right? But there are substances, for example, in the current era, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, for example, which could be indochine, which delay the resorption of the jaws of the alveoli, cocaine, which does not act as an anti-inflammatory for more carcoca at some point. I calculate that the anesthesia it produces makes the riboso delay, right? Everything that inflames, that hurts and bothers, makes bone resorption accelerate and the bone closes. When you want to minimize it with some medication, it takes longer. The first acceleration of the resolution of the alveoli would be in the first 6 months, 7 months, and then the rest up to 5, 6, 10 years, it becomes slow. If Maria is deduced that due to lack of teeth of molars she had one, says it has been a current thing. No, it has been a slow thing. Why? Because the upper molars have grown and wanted to occupy the space of the lower molars. That phenomenon first is very natural. If I remove a molar and don't put a replacement, the upper molar will tend to lower more. That's on one hand. So for what? To favor chewing. If Maria had 10 to 30 years of evolution of that lack of molars and had to eat soft, we can't speculate much that eating soft were mollusks and that she got intoxicated with mollusk and died, for example. Because if she had died there before the molar was resorbed, because the sudden intoxication kills her first, and she wouldn't have had time to close the alveoli. Therefore, long-term shellfish intoxication for me did not exist. If she had to have died from shellfish intoxication now in the end, when she already had closed alveoli and already being old, at 30, 40 years, 40 and something, suddenly she had that bad luck and died from that. And before she would have eaten soft food relatively, which could be soft corn or crushed from the mortars and what do I know, but something similar, typical of the time of Peru at that time. But I don't know if it was so soft because it made those molars work that came down from above over the spaces, over the diastemas that are produced as if wanting to chew there, over the gum alone. From there, I deduce all that thing according to what are not my studies, are studies of Dr. Rangel, right?
Yes, besides, he talked about this mosquito that apparently bit Maria, according to what I understood, is from Africa.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I tell you one thing. Look, in Maria, it gave me, in the measurements, it gives me of black race. But if it gives me black race and mozzarella, I think it gives me black race what I did of measurements before. And in this case, Paloma gives me white race. There are things that don't fit in a puzzle, not even if we turn it around. Well, now it doesn't surprise me that there is African genetics where the cradle of humanity is born, there in Ethiopia, the African center, the south, right? Well, it doesn't surprise me either how it came here, whether it came with Maria or Montserrat, or that it came in one of her ancestors, which then generates the genetic transmission to Maria. Well, now it doesn't scare me that there have been minor migrations of the form, I don't know how they were, but that they continue to contribute. When a man enters the world, he then manages it to his liking, walking all over the world. I figure there's no place on earth that hasn't been stepped on by man, especially over these thousands of years that have passed, where anything can happen. Columbus, when he came to America, was the last to discover it.
Yes, that's it.
And on top of that, there was a sudden and terrible change, which is another topic, right? So it doesn't surprise me. And that he has monkey genetics, and I also said he comes from monkeys, he does too. I said in the book that there are dormant inactive genes in man from the monkey, and in the monkey, the ones that belong to man are dormant. So it doesn't surprise me. I didn't see anything. I mean, I liked it and I shared it, and he fully descends from African, descends from monkey, and descends from unknown. Yes, the previous being, that the unknown that I named the previous being. Now the case of Manuel Paloma is already giving me the white race. And there I am. Let's say I have to adjust again so I don't get dizzy. Let's see where I'm going.
How strange all this is.
But it's typical of such a modern skull. In the CT scans, where in the other color scans with movement, the brain is reduced at the base of the skull, forward, right? A marvel.
How strong.
So that's why I'm missing. I have to do the class polygon and I have to follow another series of measures. But look at what it just gave me, right? At first glance, what happens to me with all this?
Yes. What madness, doctor? I wanted this. Anyway, if you want just to wrap up, I wanted to ask you about this scientific article we've been talking about, discussing a bit. What are the possibilities of making one in some international publication that we can help translate all this? Would you be open to trying to make a scientific article about your theory?
Yes, of course. I mean, I can't say no because it would contradict everything one has been contributing modestly, logically, that all these things I talk about, I believe they don't fall on deaf ears, but people know them later. And I have no interest in keeping my theory secret, which I am gradually giving, saying this, that, and the other. Look, it reminds me of a topic. I think I heard Dr. Rangel who talked about a bacteria that eats uranium. Well, all that needs to be investigated. One, sir. I had an investigation that I did on a uranium derivative called Gara Adon, and I did it in the courts of Cordoba. The following happened. Look, at the large archive that has all the trial and litigation files of the judiciary since the 1800s. They accumulate in a large warehouse. One goes and consults famous litigations from 1800, from 1900, from when man took the lands of the indigenous people, and both from that and from current litigations, current trials. So it was done until the General Archive was made, which is now very large and nice and very computerized. At the time when I was a doctor at the court, a large shed, a huge warehouse was made where large shelves were placed, and all that was accumulated, but it was dark and poorly ventilated. So the employees working in that area fainted mid morning, their blood pressure dropped, and not just one. It caught my attention. So the Superior Court says, well, let's see what's going on with this because, well, the labor part, the health part, and all that. And I go and measure the Garadon, and it was in excess, which is not strange because at night, in the dark and poorly ventilated, the gas from the stones, from the foundations that the walls and columns are built from, emits an emanation through the smooth or the veins of the stone, which is a colorless, tasteless gas. You don't feel it, you don't touch it. But what does it produce in humans? It produces an alteration in the shape of the red blood cell, which is like a coin with two concavities, one on each side. Due to electromagnetic and electrostatic tension, it makes it like that. It has hemoglobin inside and transports oxygen in the body. Well, radon gas makes it globular, makes it lose its electric charge, and then it becomes a sphere. Having that sphere, it doesn't transport oxygen and accumulates in the microcapillaries. So the blood pressure drops suddenly and the person fainted. You took them out of there, gave them some ventilation, and they recovered a bit. So, what was the solution? The solution was to ventilate at a great height and not have people there so much, give more light and have them enter and exit in a slightly more dynamic way. But what do I mean by this? The argon gas is a uranium derivative, an emanation that derives from it. And when radon gas, which is eliminated in a half-life of 3 days and a bit, meaning that half of its electronic ionizing electric charge is eliminated in about 3.5 days, and the other half in the rest another 3 days more, so 7 days in total. But when the components that release the space, let's say ionizing, are eliminated, they cause a type of lead, 129. I don't remember which is derived from it, but is eliminated in much longer time, much longer. And being ionizing, it has more time to act in the cells, causing cancer or causing genetic alterations. So, when I heard about that bacteria, the normal human being in human evolution as we know it never had protection against uranium. It is estimated that many men from the caveman era, prehistoric, have often sat to rest on uranium stones and didn't know it from there. We don't know from there if they died or not because there is no record of that. Currently, free uranium is not there. Why? Because companies come and take it directly. They don't leave it loose because it's very valuable. So you can't find uranium mines so easily in the open as prehistoric man. But what happens if man, like the Nazca mummies or derivatives, had a bacteria that did it, that being in contact with uranium radiation environments, the bacteria protects them. Why? Because this bacteria makes uranium precipitate as phosphate and precipitates it and inactivates it. That's the bacteria I managed to study a bit, a type of bacteria that already exists and is known, which is very ancient, many thousands of years old, but has been detected now and would be a defense to nullify the radiations, make the schedule inactive. It makes it precipitate. That also remained with me as a concept that, well, the Tornagales I will continue studying in their thing and all that.
Yes, of course, it's good. More studies are needed, and that's what all the scientists involved in this recognize. We need to do more research, and I think things will speed up a bit more because of the November 9th hearing. We are already seeing the first effects. Last thing now, yes, just to leave. What did you think of all this about the hearing? How did you experience it? What is your conclusion of what the hearing was? If you can give me your opinion.
Well, two conclusions. One, the one I think I always want to handle is not to give an opinion, because I want to give an opinion as a doctor, and if I give an opinion in another way, I stop being a doctor and I will make a mistake. I will already make many mistakes as a doctor. Imagine on top of that with others. But as a citizen and seeing the things that are happening and knowing the evolution that all these things have had, I believe that one should never disrespect people, not even when one wants to show that they know more than the other about archaeology, about something related, and say, no, you don't. And when someone else is speaking, no, no, but that's not how it is, and take away the video or cut off the microphone. I don't know if that happened. Well, but I mean, you can always say no, but at a high level.
If you do it politely and with respect,
Do it politely, because what happens next? Not only because you can be wrong or not, I think 2009 is wrong, but there's no need to go that far. If precisely what we need is to do it differently to be able to move forward. If we are going to do things like Homo habilis started, who took that stone and saw that he could throw it at another, that the stone hurt, then he said, this stone is mine, I will use it to throw it at everyone. That stone throw and kept it as his possession. And there came selfishness, resentment, and all those things. If we continue like this, then we will make the stone prevail by wanting to say that the government is right in this, or the university with this, or the Ministry of Culture of this, or the one who works here, or the other who is on the other side. If what's needed is the opposite, we need to unite to find the truth, right?
and it's so basic, doctor. Yet people ignore it easily. It's a battle in all these controversial topics or unknown matters where it doesn't matter who's right. If they're fighting and disrespecting and they're like, no, you shut up, no, you, instead of sitting and talking, which is really needed, we would have solved many problems, I think. But ego is very much in the middle of this.
It's none of the Homo sapiens. We must bow our heads because it's us and it's human nature. That's why it's hard to prove there's a species like us, or better, at least in ideas. Look, I'll tell you a folk story. In Argentine provinces, there's different folklore music, like the chacarera music of the Argentine gaucho, a mix of Spanish and indigenous, where the gaucho is the main dissenter, striking and all, always complaining about injustice. That's a way of being. But in the chacarera, there is a verse, Yusan, and the argument starts. And below it says, everyone talks and yells and no one knows anything. And then the guitar plays, reflecting the spirit of the people. Everyone talks, everyone yells, and the more you yell, the worse. And then they realize everyone said strange things and no one knows what they said.
Yes, we evolved with a mouth facing one way and 2 ears covering 360 degrees. So by nature, we should listen more than we speak. And now it's the opposite.
That's why. Well, I think everything has a solution. Presenting things is basic. So I have hope, a lot of hope, because you said I'm content with some saying I have this theory white and the other black. Positive or negative, it will be seen later. Then a conclusion must be drawn and the foundations established. I think the same. There are efforts, will, but no money. Why money? We don't have big equipment. I measure my things with my compasses. They measure with X ray scanners, which I don't trust. If they give me a tape measure, I prefer my own tape, because if the battery is dead, it'll measure 1 centimeter less. So, but everyone contributes their own. The other contributes 2009, the genetic part. Well, there's something I try to do and keep in mind to not make mistakes. One's own is not the main thing. What I say, I'm never thinking I have the truth and will convince everyone. When I talk more and explain, It's so they understand me, to make myself understood. But I'm not thinking what I say is gospel. So when this lady says yes, because Dr. Pietro surely doesn't know, because genetics rules now, and then she says no, that's no longer measured as Darwin said, or as Pepito Juan or whoever says. Now everything is based on genetic evolution. So Darwin no longer applies. I say, and if she realized I made the opposite theory to Darwin's, I laughed. But then I say, so you shouldn't think, look, those who believe, surely there are many sects or religions that have adapted to the morning of Messiah.
Put it this way, all this theory of extraterrestrials, there are people married to the idea they don't come from elsewhere. But
Well. But listen, but that's a small percentage. But never, and in this genetics is fabulous, but I never absolutely. The proof is in this pigeon skull. I see genetics, it's modern, but look at what it's marking inside. So genetics doesn't show through the human body. It's there, but you have to look for it. And the human body often distorts genetics and makes us look primitive or advanced, or makes one part of the body look one way and the other, and it makes us look something grotesque at times. And yet, genetics, when you extract it, says something else. So it's not the whole thing either to have a little bit of, let's say, I don't call it milda because there's no need to go that far, but to have each one a concept that says, I contribute this is not even half, it's a contribution. It will be useful or not as it adapts to the rest of the world. And so each one, but to say not only, for example, genetics, no, well, no.
and then keep an open mind, right? Also,
And in that aspect, let's say, my character sometimes, I directly don't want to argue, nor do I want to argue in vain. How am I going to argue a math measure that I had to learn in medicine if I'm the same?
when I see they don't want to listen, not even talk, I prefer not to get involved because I think it's very good that this from the beginning, not mentioning names because it only gives them attention, just like we did, was perfect.
Besides, a lot besides, if at times I saw it as disrespectful, and I wrote a small chronicle later on the internet saying those people who are disrespectful and daring, I put, and I clarified that whoever reads my book, please read it textually, don't make things up, don't change this, because I haven't said such a thing. Well, when I see there's disrespect or they dare in things I don't much more, right? Don't name them so they don't become famous, because it seems to me that disrespect doesn't even have a name for me. And of course, I'm going to try not to have more contact with this person. Yes, normal, because I don't need it. And besides that, I want to have contact with people who help me contribute to things
Normal, it seems perfect to me.
and who help me so that what I have can be useful to others. And even if what I have is wrong, let it serve as a step for someone else to step on and do things right. Because theories, the evolution of science is not due to the triumphs of science, it's due to the mistakes that.
Science has and the daring to do what you're doing. And people like you too, one has to dare to come up with their own theories too. And based on study and work,
I always rely a little, I try to take refuge in numbers, which I can't change.
mathematics.
When I heard about Angel, Dr. Angel, remember I told you later, I commented, I have a great peace of mind because we have a very similar language in conclusions. The same as when there was a study by Dr. Zuniga with his son, with Dr. Hernandez, which was published in a magazine. Well, I made a comment with you. Well, I didn't agree with many measurements because I did them differently, but the conclusion I was happy because we reached the same. So no offense or anything. They have their methods. They measure like that, but look where we got to the same. So that's it. We fulfilled, you see?
And that's what's important to me. That's what in English is called peer review, which is letting people who are also scientists see your work and test it, or also make their own measurements and reach the same. And that's the scientific method. So we're seeing it in real time right now as they're reaching similar or close conclusions.
I wish in the world all people, even those who don't, let's say, don't dedicate themselves to study but do another activity, would use the scientific method, because the scientific method could be used by a housewife at that moment, because it's the fastest and easiest way to reach reliable truth. Well, so when I had my students in medicine, how did I make them measure the skulls? I gave them the compass and grabbed them. I grabbed their hands and led them to the skull and placed them, look here, like this, look. Then you know what I told them? I told them, close your eyes, touch it with your eyes closed. You see it differently than with your eyes open, and don't forget anymore. Well, so that way, let's say classic and simple, and that's what I want my desire to be, that anyone in the world, even if they're not a doctor, and I tell them, look, measure like this with the protractor. What did it give you? 1 on 13. I gave you the same as me. Have you seen that it's easy? Have you seen that it gave you the same conclusion I have? So that they can see it, even if they're not a doctor. That's my desire, that I have to transmit to all people like this, because it can be done. You don't need to be a scientist, a medical specialist in that. No, listen, one puts in the effort, can.
Do you think they'll let us visit with cameras at some point to do what Yusan says?
Of course, I'll be happier to welcome you to this place where I work. I hope it can be that way.
If we're going to try, I think we will. Dr. Piotti, I want to thank you very much for your time, but especially for your friendship, honesty, and the good vibes you always bring. I really enjoyed talking with you because you're a very honorable person, so I want to thank you for your time.
You're always getting involved in things that aren't true, right? Well, I really appreciate it. I feel the same way about you, because I see you as an extremely reliable and complete professional in conveying concepts to the public, to the people, a truly exceptional social communicator, a journalist. So, honestly, I assure you that with you I feel very confident speaking, because you allow it, you understand it, and I know where it's going afterward. So, from my side, it's mutual and much more towards you.
I think we're going to do a few more rounds before I head to Argentina to visit you.
I'm going to start looking like Tyson. I hope I don't lose. Well, whenever you like. I'll tell you something else I want. Being a member of the Inkari Institute Studies, I feel it's my duty to make things more known. Of course, I'm going to take advantage of your platform, and almost absolutely, I would almost say exclusively, if you allow me, 2009, and I'm going to continue. I have to do a series of more measurements of this, then they'll give me more results. And if you allow me, through you, I want to share them too. Of course, someday, look, someday I might write another book, but the book doesn't matter, that's for later. But in the meantime, let people know what I can achieve, to see what all this is for. Because if I do them and save them for when I write a book in a year or two, I waste time and others waste time not knowing what one can achieve or not.
That's how we'll do it. We'll coordinate through WhatsApp. And I ask you to take care of yourself, please. Stay happy, eat well, and we'll stay in touch.
Doctor, it's been a pleasure as always. I really appreciate this broadcast you do, which is extremely valuable to me. And you, when time passes and you reach my age, I won't be here anymore, but it doesn't matter. When you reach my age, you'll remember what I tell you, the effect your program and broadcast will have on people over time.
Thank you very much, Dr. An.
You'll see, now you're very young, you see it, but you don't have to live it, you said. And when you live your old age for many years, you'll learn, because we always have to learn to be old too. Then you'll remember and see all the impact you had in this case. Thank you very much, because it's evident in your programs. It's like when you look at this skull, I see your program and say, no, I know the projection your program has, and I imagine it long term. As I say, thank you very.
Kind. Thank you very much. So thank you, friends, for enjoying Dr. Piot and with me. See you next time.
See you.